participants are from the ENAR network. And we hope and intend that this will be a respectful online meeting. So you can pose questions on Facebook. That's where we will be taking questions from. And we ask you in the comments section just to remain responsible for the information that you put there, George Floyd, and the ensuing protests, which have been mediatized to such a great extent over the past 2 weeks. So this is a moment for us to check in with our network and hear from our participants. So I want to dive straight into our first question, which we asked, in fact, during the first podcast, George Floyd. And how do you see and experience this moment as, you know, we're kind of in a global uprising, some people will call it an uprising. So from your own personal perspectives, what were you doing, what were you thinking when you first heard about George Floyd? So I will put you first.
Okay. My initial reaction was kind of, I would like to say, I wasn't feeling anything actually, because I wasn't thinking about it until I only heard about it, I think 2 days afterwards. Then when I saw the video, my immediate reaction was that of fear. And the fear was for my children, because I have teenage boys and other youths, other Black youths out there, that what the thought that came to my mind was that it could be anybody that could get killed at that instant at the hands of the police. And why does this have to happen, regardless of what that person might have done or what transpired? It is not right. To me, it is not a right thing to do. It is more than, in fact, that is the way I see it. And I believe it is a wake-up call for every one of us out there. Seeing the uprising that is going on, this has been ongoing. Police brutality is something that is common, is on our doorstep every day, and we need to rise up against it. We need to voice out. Though some of us tend to think, oh, it's normal, it's something that is ongoing, so why should this happen now? Why should people stand up to it now? If nobody is standing up to it, if nobody is voicing out, it will keep continuing, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want, there has to be a stop to it now.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about fear. I also felt something similar to that, and just fear of the unknown, what's going to happen next. All of these kind of emotions. Okay, so I will ask Belle to go next, if you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. Well, for me, to be honest, I think at the time that I read about it, or probably saw it on social media, I was already still very much grieving collectively the deaths of, or learning about the deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. I have family in the South, in Alabama and in Georgia and in Florida. It is because of the way the administration responded, and that as groups began to galvanize here, okay, it's fantastic to see that support and inspiring to see the solidarity with our siblings in the US. But are we going to finally start to turn some consistent, sustained attention towards police brutality and violence in Europe towards Black people? And also, I suppose I, as a Black woman, I was also very troubled by the initial complete focus on George Floyd, even though we should be focusing on George Floyd, of course, but that we had to really call and fight to talk about Breonna Taylor, for example. I'm happy, relieved to see that there is, we're starting to really see a movement for justice for Breonna and other Black women. And that in these movements, we are very much supporting and in solidarity with our brothers and sisters and siblings in the US and around the world, but also calling out what's happening here. for me, that's an amazing thing to see. I hope it just continues as the protests go on around the world.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with me, or us. I think it's really interesting when you mentioned some other individuals that had died at the hands of the police. That idea of like re-traumatization is something that I find considerable in this whole moment, and also the dynamic of you know, other identities. Women, Black women, also need to be recognised that they're part of this phenomenon of police brutality. So yes, I think I will go next to Nana to also answer the same question.
Yes, so my initial thoughts was not again, because as my colleague here said earlier, we just had Aubrey and Brianna, and this again, and I honestly didn't think it'll go anywhere, because from my observation as to what's been happening in terms of police brutality in America, it happens and then people forget about it. But then when the police were charged, sorry, we call it Gardaí in Ireland, when they were charged, I was like, okay, maybe this time it's different. And then when I saw the protests in America, and then in Ireland, there was a solidarity protest, and this was the time that we were locked down in Ireland, and there were 5,000 people, which is huge. It's like one of the biggest protests that I had ever seen in Ireland for race. It is the biggest race protest in Ireland. It's the only race protest in Ireland. And for me, initially it was not again. Another brother has been murdered at the hands of police officers. But then over time, it's like, okay, this might actually bring some change. It's unfortunate that this is how change has to come. But yeah, that was my thought. Those are my thoughts.
Unmute myself. These protests are quite astonishing. It's amazing. It's fantastic that they're happening. But you know, also we have to be concerned and careful that especially in this time of Corona. So yeah, interesting. I will go to you next, Karen. If you can unmute yourself and answer the same question.
My mom showed me this video. I didn't see it on social media. It was her who raised the awareness and showed me, look, did you see what's happening? And then she did her research, and then she saw, oh my God, it's been happening again. It's a police officer. And my first thought was, well, this time with this 8-minute video, this person needs to be charged. There can't be any excuses. There can't be justifying that the police officer needed to react this way. We saw it 8 minutes long that he was killing a Black man. And so I thought this time we need to get this police officer. But then my second thought was, why is the whole world sharing this video where we see a man dying on video? We see a Black man dying on video and taking the last bit of his dignity by actually sharing this very personal, very breathtaking moment. And my second thought was, I had wished that maybe his face or would have made it a mark on it, had put a mark on it or something. Because if I think about other cases, not touching our communities, not touching Black and brown people, if you think about other cases of violence, you always protect the victim, you always protect the identity of the victim. And though we are using this for the momentum right now, and we see that there's a lot of movement and change also going on, especially when I look at the US, I do think that would have been important in that case as well. Black Lives Matter till the end, and this means protecting dignity and protecting the identity of victims.
Yeah, I think that video, I just, it's hard to watch, you know, it's really hard to watch. I think a lot of people that I know say they haven't watched it, they can't bear to watch it. Others have said, you know, we need to bear witness to this video. But yeah, it's scary to watch it. But I'm moving on to Law. Did you want to say anything, or we'll just wait to the end, actually?
Okay. I was on Facebook and I saw this video. I was just like, I was shocked. I was feeling suffocating like this man. And my first thought was not again. It's happening again. And not again, it's happening. Enough is enough. It was a kind of mixed emotion in that moment. And I was like, mostly in this period of coronavirus, for sure, nothing will be done about this, because I live in Italy, so the situation about the coronavirus here is very terrible, and no one could go outside. So I was just like, this man, it will be a forget like another's before. So after that, when I see everywhere people going outside and people didn't care about the lockdown, I was like, maybe this is the right moment to face for real this problem of racism. This was my first impression. I'm very sorry because I can't say more of this.
No worries, that's perfect. Thank you for all of your initial thoughts on that. Just before I go on to the next question, I've been asked to remind everyone who's listening live now to add your comments or add questions that you would like to ask of the participants of this discussion. So the next question that I have is really, you know, we now see that there are more and more protests happening on the streets in solidarity against police brutality here in Europe, not just in the US. And also now there's some more significant calls for structural racism, which can't be denied. You can see protesters on the street there. But at first, a lot of political leaders tried to deny that police brutality was an issue here in Europe, happy to point the finger at the US. So why do you think that there has been such a silence, especially at the beginning, by governments and policymakers in your specific countries that you're working in, but also within the European Union? So, and other human rights institutions, maybe also even the UN, there was a lot of silence. Why do you think that that was the case? And who would like to go first in that discussion?
I don't mind. For me, it's about complicity, really. If we think about how the EU is structured, how the borders are managed, We think about what is happening to asylum seekers and refugees on those borders and in the Mediterranean. And how member states are complicit in this. If they were to start to really talk about rights for Black and brown people in a really structural, global way, in a meaningful way, it's going to open an enormous can of worms that they just don't want to deal with. If we look at it more at the national level, in the Netherlands, we have quite a conservative government, I think it's fair to say. And the voters, the voters of our current government are also quite xenophobic. Perhaps they wouldn't see themselves in that way, typical kind of Dutch tolerance, liberalism, and so on, but they are. And so again, in the past, Mark Rutte has been, he's made very right-wing statements when it's come to general elections. Now, we have seen him kind of give in a little bit. He's admitted that perhaps Zwarte Piet is racist and is detrimental to, an inclusive society. He doesn't want to really go so far as to say that institutional racism is a thing, so he's trying to be very careful. If I think about back home in the UK, it's quite clear why Boris Johnson doesn't say anything. You think about how the Black Lives Matter protest in London had to be cancelled today because of threat of violence from, Winston Churchill fans, and Boris Johnson sees himself as a 21st century Churchill. So, I mean, it says enough.
A poor version.
Sorry?
A poor version.
Right. I mean, so it says enough. Why, how he aligns himself, how he's used xenophobic tropes, and how a lot of governments actually in the last decade have been using the, really trying to appeal to alt-right xenophobic sensibilities. For a lot of them, it's about power. And then, of course, our politicians and our policymakers are majority white, of a certain background, a certain gender, and it's about the fragility. And then they have to own up to their own bigotry or their own prejudice in this process. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to call them out, but for me, that's why there's little to no response, or when there is a response, it's found lacking.
I'm going to go to Karen next, and also maybe you could talk about, definitely from both perspectives, being part of an EU-wide network as a chair, but also working in Germany. It would be good to hear both perspectives if possible.
I guess from both perspectives, it's easy to say it's just been another Black man being killed by the hands of the police. Nothing new there, nothing to actually raise awareness or condemn or criticize from the state's leaders' perspective. We've seen it in the past. The European Union prides itself as the defender of human rights. And the European Union is very easy to turn towards African countries and to highlight human rights issues over there. But when it touches the United States of America, or even internally within the European Union, there is a complete silence. And I would say this complete silence is linked to the denial of the existence of racism, and especially racism within the police or within institutions in general. So we saw that at first there was no reaction. There was no reaction in Germany. There was no reaction on the EU level. And then when the protests started rising, we saw a reaction, but instead of showing solidarity or even criticizing Trump, his government, his administration, we saw a direct defense from the German side, but we also saw it from the commissioner's side, and that's why we as a network, and I believe a lot of organizations who are part of this discussion today also signed this letter. We addressed to von der Leyen, and in specific because of the remark from the Vice President Skivas, saying that we in Europe don't face the same problems as in the US. We don't face structural discrimination, and police violence is definitely not the same. All we do have are social disparities. So we took this quote from the newspaper to address the issue here in Europe, to state that this is absolutely wrong. And frankly speaking, it's a slap in all our faces, that the communities who've been working on this for years, who have been saying for years that we have a structural problem here, that we need to address this, that we do have similar cases of torture, of death in custody, of rape, people of our communities being tortured and raped by the police. We with ENAR, and maybe Ojak, you also want to highlight that later. We came up with the map, especially showing the impact of COVID-19, where we did also see a rise of police brutality. 3 people even died at the hands of police officers. So it's all there. It's all out there. Our communities have been saying it, our organizations have been saying it, but police, the decision makers, they kind of ignore it, don't want to see it, and tend that it doesn't exist. So that's why we as a network have been calling for official data, which needs to be collected by the member states to actually document what's been going on, because for now, all they do, and that's a very strong discussion and a very strong opinion here in Germany as well, for now, what they do is say it's all single individual cases, and there's no connection whatsoever, and there's no structural background within the police. And we do need to break this narrative by saying our communities are collecting the data. We need this kind of official data in order to show the problem, and then in the second step, come up with solutions.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of civil society organizations are doing, is trying to collect this data. But since all these protests have started, there is so much more information on police brutality, deaths in custody, that are becoming well known. So it's harder and harder, I suspect, for governments to deny that the issue is a problem. I don't know if Law wanted to say something.
I think for me there is no surprise, because Europe always has this kind of position, very hypocrite, and maybe because they think here in Europe they are better than the US, just because maybe they have a different story, maybe because there wasn't this kind of the same plantation style, and because in Europe you can't buy weapons everywhere, so they think they are better. But the reality is it look the same. Maybe it's worse. Like I think the politic of Europe is a kind of selective amnesia. So they try to show that here everybody is equal. Like if we take the case of the France, unité, égalité, I don't know what they are saying. And we
Fraternity. The last one.
Yes, we know that all of this is very, very, it's fake. It's fake. They just they just try to be nice, to look nice. And I was very surprised, all those movements in Europe. But I think it was like they didn't want to seem like, come si dice,
Hello. She's gone somewhere else, it seems. All right, Lo, are you there with us? Is it just me, or can you cannot see her? Ah, she's back.
Okay. So despite of the prevalence of racial profiling, despite of police brutality, Europe never faced this problem in this way. They always deny this problem. It doesn't exist. I don't know, here in Italy, it's a mess. All the world know that it's a mess. About, I was very, very surprised, because here in Italy, like, we have the problem of asylum seekers, but I was very, very, it was very interesting seeing everybody about Floyd, when every day those people, nobody consider them like human. So maybe we can start with Floyd, maybe step by step, okay, piano, piano, something will be done, okay.
Okay, Nana, please go ahead and tell us your thoughts on why those governments and institutions are silent.
So I'd like to give an Irish perspective. So here in Ireland, when the protest happened, 5,000 people showed up in city centre. I mean, Irish people, and this was multiracial, impressively enough, which we as people of African descent were all surprised at. I'm not going to lie, we were very surprised to see white people, brown people come and support speak out against the police brutality. But also, like Laura said, we have here an issue where people who are asylum seekers are kept in something called direct provision, which are such inhumane conditions that they live in. So during these protests, we actually, many of the civil societies that came highlighted the issue of direct provision and highlighted the racism that's also present in Ireland. So when the government heard this, I mean, the first reaction from the Gardaí was that they were going to charge the organizers with criminal charges for breaking COVID-19 laws, because you're not allowed to gather more than 4 people. So first we were like, so we're protesting. Okay, fair enough, we broke the COVID-19 regulations. Your first reaction is not to say, oh, don't hold another protest. It's to say, we're going to charge you with criminal sanctions. Your first reaction is aggression. It's for us just justified and showed us where they stood. And then in the government side, then many people in society were saying, oh, this isn't America. Ireland is not like that. And initially there was, again, that's deny. But then what's the protest in America and what the murder of George Floyd has done is that many people here have begun to tell their stories of racism. We see now in Ireland, many students in schools have begun to call out their teachers, their peers who were racist, who casually use the N-word. And now the Department of Education in Ireland could not ignore the voice of hundreds. And now it's all over Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, people just recounting the stories of what they experienced in secondary school, in primary school, at the hands of not just pupils, but also teachers and principals being silent, ignoring, and also perpetrating hate. So the Department of Justice could not ignore this. They can't all be lying, and have opened an investigation into these schools. And so
there's a response just recently.
Yes, recently they've opened an investigation, And I mean, one of the schools that was accused in that loan, we even had the principal come out and deny, obviously. But it has actually pushed a lot of pressure, to the extent that now the Taoiseach, that's the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, came out and actually said, okay, we do have a problem, and we should actually start dealing with it. And then they very quickly scrambled to organize an anti-racism committee to try and figure out, okay, how do we sort out this racism issue in Ireland? But the funny thing is, I work for Africa Centre. I volunteered with them. IDPAD. We have been shouting this for years, for decades. Africa Centre has been there 20 years, and anti-racism has been part of. They've been part of ENAR in Ireland, and we've been saying this for years. The data is there. The European Union put out a report, Being Black in Europe. Ireland was the second most racist country in Europe. The data is there. It's been there. We've been telling you. You know it. In the pubs, in people's homes, you know the conversations that you have about Black people. And white Irish people are coming out as well saying, why are you all so surprised? Why is this a shock? You know, you cannot deny racism, because you know what you think about Black people. You know what you think about people of African descent. You know what you think about even people of African descent who are Irish, who are mixed race. You know that they were never accepted as Irish. So now we actually we had this silence and denial. Like Laura said, they tried to put this front of, we're better than America. We didn't have plantations. But like, yeah, you didn't have plantations, but you enslaved people and you colonized the entire African nation. Let's not forget about the scramble for Africa. Colonized, and as a result of the colonization and the looting, many of us now had to come to Europe, where the gold was taken, because there was nothing left for us. So what do you mean you don't have a hand in this view of hate and this view of superiority and inferiority? It has always been complete nonsense, and now they are listening. In Ireland anyway, they are opening up the Anti-Racism Commission. They're opening up investigations into schools that have now been accused of being racist. So things are starting to happen in terms of they're starting to listen and document. Now we just hope that they actually do take the actions and the solutions after that.
Well, yeah, let's see. I mean, it's good to hear that they're no longer silent, and that there is some opportunities here for us, well, for you in Ireland, but I think in other parts of Europe as well. They've been forced out of their silence by the number of people protesting on the streets, and that's a positive. But Ayodele, what's it like also in Ireland, right?
Yeah, it's the same. Like she rightly said, that steps are now being taken to ensure that the narratives are changing. Like in my community, immediately when the uprising starts with the protest, one of the things that the guards within, or the police within our community did, was to call the community leaders within the community around, just to assure us that what is happening in the US is not something that is happening or will be happening in Ireland, even though we know there is brutality, police brutality everywhere. But they are trying to assure us that this is not, what is happening over there is not the same. It's not the same story happening here. But we know that is not so. Our youth are complaining every day of being harassed, of being searched, of being stopped. Wherever they go, they are afraid to go out. Even parents are afraid to go for their children to go out into the community because of being harassed by the police and what will happen. And most of these migrant children would be afraid to and be worried for their parents that if I do something out there and I got caught or I got stopped by the police, what will my parents say? What will happen to them? Because the parents will be ashamed of being labeled that, oh, it's your kids that are doing this, it's your kids that are doing that in the community. So the police are saying that, no, we are not like that. They're going to look into some issues that have been raised by the community to ensure that we have to ensure that all forms of discrimination that is being talked about is eliminated, hopefully, that they are listening, hopefully they are listening to what people are saying.
Yeah, I think that this is where it's going to be interesting, because governments and institutions may have been silent for a little while. Now they're realizing that no, they actually have to engage in this issue. But how exactly they engage in this issue we'll see. It's not clear to me if they will be just window dressing, or there'll be some policies that are going to be actually making a difference, if they can. And so, yeah, it's down to us to also kind of push for those the things that we want to change, not just in police brutality, but wider than that. Wherever we can, identify things that we want to be different. And I think really right now, this is our time, this is our moment to acknowledge our power and our leverage for however long it may last, because there may be some other crisis that happens in a couple of months' time. So this is the situation that we're in now. So I don't know, I'm gonna move on to my last question before we go into the question and answer session. And I mean, again, we're still talking about politics. We're still talking about, doing something differently with this anti-racist movement. How can we take inspiration from what's been happening, from the protests? I mean, I find it just fascinating that, people in Bristol were trying very hard to get rid of a statue in Bristol that was memorializing someone who was part of the slave trade for a long time before this moment that we're in. And within 2-3 weeks, they managed to take it down and throw it into the sea. So I find this kind of action really inspiring, because normally political kind of negotiations can take such a long time. It's frustrating for us who are doing this work every day to be in those kind of negotiations. So the last question I have for you is not going to be an easy one for you to answer, but and there is no right way to answer it. But how can we take inspiration from the protests and this different way of kind of taking control of the situation? How can we vision also something together, a different type of society, expand our horizons? Because we often are trying to fight against discrimination, but where does the vision come from? And I think that's really important for us now to take that opportunity to say we want a different type of society. So I don't know who wants to come in first on that question. Who has the inspiration to say something first? Go ahead, Nana.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to try and answer all of that, because as you rightly said, it's quite a big one. But what this protest has done for my community in Ireland, like I said, it's given us a voice, and it's allowed us to see that we have allies in there. So there are white people who have loud voices and who don't want to look bad, who don't want to look racist, even if they are. No, but so that has given us leverage. That Europeans they care about appearances. So putting them on blast is something that I've learned from this protest. We have to put them on. Whenever someone slips up, when there's a xenophobic, racist incident, yes, we can do the appeals process, go to the ombudsman, go to the court, but we ought not to be silent about this in the public. And we have to make sure that the public hears about this and are put aware. And that's automatically, as we have seen with this protest, lobbies and pressures the government, and sometimes people have, like you said, the statute have taken the justice into their own hands. Not encouraging that by any means, but yes. And so I work for IDPAD, which is the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, the directive. So what that is actually, I've been working on that for a few months, and that's been operating in Ireland for about a year. and we've created the documents that have potential solutions to the institutional racism in schools, in employment, with young people that they face in society. Because the UN put out this brilliant program of activities that states should implement into their framework to try and tackle xenophobia and racism and things like that. And we have presented that. Ireland has said, okay, we'll listen to it. But I think now this has actually put us on a platform where we can present that to the government in the next few weeks. We can present that as a solution, and again put that into the public space, because usually we had put in papers and sent it to them, but now we're taking a different tactic that we're going to publish our solutions, send it to the government, but also send it to the community and say we've told them this and this, and these are the potential solutions. So actually putting things out into the public spaces and allowing the publics to have that information, that knowledge, and that will lobby and bring forth the answers. Because George Floyd's murder would have gone unnoticed if it wasn't recorded, if it wasn't shared. Because it was recorded, because it was shared, that's why there's been such momentum after it. So yes, we'll put that pen to paper, record it, share it to not just the government and the people who are going to implement solutions, but also to the public, so that they lobby and they take action. So that's what I've learned from this.
Does anyone else want to just chip in there about how we vision together as a network for a different type of society?
Yeah. And what I would like to say, in addition to what Nana has said, is that the information are out there, like she rightly said, and the resolution has been made already, but the implementation stage needs to be well supervised. Not just to sit on the shelf there. Once it's implemented, there has to be an evaluation of what has been implemented. There has to be a strategy in place specifically that deals with Black people, just like they have for the Roma and the traveler, the strategy in Ireland here. There has to be a kind of strategy that will put all this in place for us. The implementation needs to be well monitored as well as evaluated to see where there are failures and what needs to be improved upon. Then looking at this Black Lives Matter movement, Europe and America, they are different. We are migrants and people of African descent, but those ones, the African Americans are born there. So we are dealing with different, how will I say, data, different age structure, and the rest of that. So there has to be a kind of information sharing across the board, transatlantic information sharing between the two continents, so that whatever happens there, we can make comparison over here as well, and as well go forward on the issues. If there are similar issues that need to be worked on, then we can compare issues as well as find solutions to them.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that does provide us with some ideas about how we move forward, but I'm still wondering how we can kind of vision together as a group, as a network. And I'm going to ask Belle maybe the complicated question, if she can answer it. If she can't, then that's okay, because I already know it's going to be a bit complicated. But I think the thing that is we normally do as activists working within ENAR is that we normally will write kind of policy papers, and we will normally make significant policy recommendations, but that still puts us in that position of waiting for them to grant us whatever they decide to give us at that moment in time. We are a bit powerful now, so we can put some new agenda items on there. But if we think about the policing as a specific problem, there are some organizations, there are some people who are starting to imagine a world where we cannot be policed in the same way that we are policed now, where we think of police not as, keeping us safe, but not having to, patrol the streets and kind of be this oppressive force. So how do we get better at doing that thinking around not just like sanctions or training of the police, but completely thinking of different ways to have police?
To me, what you seem to be kind of hinting at or alluding to is the reimagination of our European society, right? Which is kind of very much tied in with the manifesto of IRIF and what we do. It's about reimagining Europe as a place where actually we're not seen as immigrants, where we are seen as very much part of this continent that we help build. Whether we're born here or not, whether we have a piece of paper that says we're citizens or not, a space, a region, a society that allows people to be a part of it and doesn't continue to encourage nativist ideas. I mean, it's difficult for me to think about policing and reimagining, the justice system without thinking about other institutions. I mean, I think you brought it up before that it's also about education, housing, health. We have to, the whole thing needs an overhaul. And one of the ways that IRIF kind of supports that in the work that we do is we try and provide platform and amplification for activists that are already doing the work. And everybody here in this roundtable today has been talking about the fact that we are already busy with this. We already know that police brutality happens. We already know about discrimination in education. We've already been monitoring and making reports. IRIF has been doing a report. We just published our 5th one every year, tracking the activism against Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands, and and in that chronicling anti-Black racism, Dutch anti-Black racism, and not even really mentioning what's happening in the US, because we don't need to qualify what is happening here to talk about it, because it's facts, it's happening, and we use our activities. We always use it as a way to amplify and archive the work of campaigners and scholars and artists within our own communities here, showing the work that they do. One of the things I always dread is that in 50 years, I will look back, I'll be a grandma, and all of the amazing things we've achieved just in the last week, taking down these statues, getting some politicians to sort of kind of start a bit of a U-turn in some of their rhetoric, starting to get institutions like Witte to actually confirm and commit to the fact that they're going to change the name. They're not going to be named after a Dutch colonial figure. This has all happened this week because of protests, because of people coming together, exactly how everybody else has said it, massive protests. I mean, Geneva this week, 30,000 people. That's never happened for an anti-racism, so it's been an incredible moment. We're in we have an incredible opportunity, and we are actually seeing, socio-political, cultural, institutional movements, let's say. I don't want to exaggerate the changes, but what I dread is that we look back later, generations in the future, and it's been rewritten that it was because of liberal, open-minded white people, not because of the work we've put in for decades, that the resources, the fact of the matter is the amount of white friends of color that have been able to source and allies and colleagues who have been able to simply look at my social media, for instance, and go to IRIF and see all the resources right there in order to inform themselves and therefore participate. Mm-hmm. We can't underestimate how important the work we've been doing has been in order to mobilize so quickly and for it to be so meaningful. So we have to use this opportunity to keep going and keep the momentum going and keep going in what we're doing and make sure that we have more impact. But we also need to think far, far, far into the future. We have to think about our grandchildren, or, if we don't want to have grandchildren, the kids, the people that will be us in 50 years, right? will they know what we did? Or will they have to be sifting through archives and dusty papers to find that the way that we are doing? I don't want them to have to, you know, rebuild the wheel in 50 years. I want there to be a very strong, tangible connection for them, so that they have we just keep building until our reimagination of Europe is a reality.
Okay. Well, you did manage to answer my question, my hard question, and now quickly, because we are running out of time. But Karen, did you manage to answer this question yet?
Yeah, I would like also to refer to what Belle just said. For me, that was the core also of empowerment. And that's also something my organization, EOTO, Each One Teach One here in Berlin and Germany does, is to really make sure that we use this protest to share the knowledge within our own communities. Because Nana, for example, mentioned the UN Decade for People of African Descent. A lot of a big part of our communities doesn't know that this decade exists. That's the first thing. Then the second thing, when I look at Germany, so maybe Nana, we can exchange after this call. I'm really interested in what you just talked about. But when I look at Germany, this decade and the action program, there's not even a start to implement the action program.
Yeah.
Even though if we look at other decades, the decade for education on development, on sustainable development, there was a huge tam-tam around it in Germany. There was a ministry who was in charge of this decade and was very well connected with the civil society. So they created a whole new institution just for this decade, being part consisting of the government, civil society, and universities. So there was a real dynamic around this whole decade, and the German government wanted to make sure that even after this 10 years, we will keep on working on sustainable development. But when we look at the decade for people of African descent, nothing. So we try to use this protest and combine it with the ongoing demands which are there also by the organizations who actually lobby, because we have a lot of organizations working with the communities, working on the ground, and they don't have the capacity to also go to the other level and really talk to policy makers. So that's really something where we need to use this whole protest and get us all on the same page, so that we all do have this collective anger and this collective will to change what we as community have been saying for a very long time, and really make sure that this discussion doesn't go backwards. Because now in Germany, I've been talking to the media a lot in these few weeks. The questions they open the interviews are with so does racism exist in Germany? That's what they start with. And I'm like, no, I'm not going there. Sorry, but no. So wow. I think we really do have to make sure that what we've already been saying, what our elderly have been saying, what the people who have been in this movement for years have been saying, that this wisdom is still out there, and that we keep on educating ourselves, keep on educating our youngsters. And the last thing I would like to say is also, of course, this has been a protest about Black Lives Matter, but I do think it's absolutely important that we have this tied allies, and I mean that's what basically ENAR is about. Have a community of different identities, and then, for example, in Germany, when I look at today, we have this protest around the memorial for Sinti and Roma, which is very close to the German Bundestag. It's a very impressive memorial for the murder of Sinti and Roma during the Holocaust, and something the Sinti and Roma community fought for a very long time. And now, because of a train track The German Deutsche Bahn, which was involved in the Holocaust, and the German government decided to remove this memorial. And here again, I believe it's really crucial that we see, okay, of course, we are protesting because of Black Lives Matter, but this is also a sign of structural racism to remove this kind of memorial, what the community fought for, and now to just come up with this kind of administrative reasons why this needs to be removed. So see where other people, where other communities need us, be there and really combine our fights, because at the end, it's not about Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism and anti-Ziganism. It's about white supremacy, which we do need to fight.
Okay, thank you for all of those answers. And we were going to do a question and answer session after the discussion, which has gone on a little bit longer than we had planned for. I enjoyed it, but we are going to take just one question, and I think this just is perfect because it just follows what Karen was saying about white supremacy and understanding white supremacy, which we haven't actually really talked about hugely. But the question is, let me just pull it up so that I can see the full thing. So the question is, did you see the High Representative Borrell's statement where he said all lives matters before saying Black Lives Matters? So he added the Black Lives Matters almost as a kind of add-on. So how did you see that statement? What does that mean? And he's essentially failing to condemn the root causes of institutional racism, etc. So who would like to respond to that question? Karen, maybe you can respond since you were talking last, just if it goes.
Yeah, I can. I must be honest here. I didn't see this this quote or this remark, but just listening to it by what you just read out, it's I think it's dangerous that he combines these two claims, because we see whenever Black Lives Matter was put up, white supremacists and racist groups answer with all lives matter. I mean, the question isn't that Black Lives Matter more than others. No, that's not the question, or that's not the issue here. The issue is that we see Black people dying at the hand of white police officers, and that in Europe, of course, we see refugees and migrants dying at the borders, and nobody is caring about it. So we did see the necessity to highlight this and to stress on this. So that's why we are claiming, and that's why we are shouting Black Lives Matter. So whenever we come up with this response, and now even combining it, that's really odd, combining all lives matter with Black Lives Matter, he's taking on the rhetoric of racists. So I highly condemn this link here.
Anyone else who would like to chip in? No, your mic is off.
I think it's just a kind of distraction in this moment. They just try to simplify these things. So maybe for me, it's the case to don't care about this kind of statement, because it's just a kind of distraction. We know that. So,
yeah, it is a distraction, but yeah, yes, you're right.
But you know, we Black, we love to talk about many things at the same times. So I don't think this is the moment now to care about this kind of. We have to be focused on our topic on Black Lives Matters.
Yes, I agree with you. This is a comment coming from outside, so I think it's important to respond. And I think
yes, I understand, but it's not the moment. Maybe after.
Maybe after.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone else agrees with Laura that we should just forget about this, or if you have something to say, please feel free to comment.
I do. I agree with her. That is not the time for that, because we all know all life matters, but then the Black life matters more now at the moment because of what is going on. We suffer more. We suffer more racism, more discrimination in terms of employment, in terms of our health, in terms of housing, in so many ways. Look at the asylum seekers too at the border. The policies that are in place for migration is not something that is worthy of mentioning because of what is going on out there. So our life matters too. If we have the opportunity that the white people have, then maybe we'll be on the equal footing rather than one above the other. So our Black life matters more now at the moment. We are talking about Black lives now, not white lives. So we all agree that all lives matter, but at this moment, at this particular point in time, Black lives matter.
I 100% agree with you on that. I think the problem is like, yes, it's distraction. No, we shouldn't maybe engage with it too much, but it is a pretty powerful person who's saying this. And actually, I'm not even thinking. I'm wondering, like, why did his PR people not stop him from saying that? I mean, it just shows like how these institutions do not get it. So it's not so much that, I mean, it's just an example, a blatant example of the whole institution, the PR people, the commission, the vice, I'm just going to see who he is again, the High Representative. He's got such a long title that I can't read it all out, nor does it matter. But yeah, I mean, it just is another example of the institutions and this white supremacy that they can't let go of the fact that they shouldn't matter in this moment as much as Black Lives Matters right now. So yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but you just said like that they don't get it, but I'm wondering, is it really, I don't want to play semantics, but like, is it really that they don't get it, or is it a form of willful ignorance? I mean, I was just reading this morning that it's now come to light that a report that was supposed to go to the British Medical Association about the COVID situation in the UK, that there were pages missing about how it had disproportionately affected Black and brown communities. I mean, this was a report about disparities, right? And then the whole section about the racial or ethnic disparities is removed. This kind of seems very deliberate. The hostile environment policy has been very deliberate. I mean, just before that was executed, the documentation that would have proven so many people that were deported should not have been was deliberately destroyed. People talk about removing statues and removing artifacts of history, but at the same time, in the 50s and the 60s, the governments deliberately destroyed documents showing how they had gone about trying to suppress uprisings for independence in the colonies, right? And in Kenya, for example. So I'm always a little bit like, I always hesitate to frame it as they don't get it, because I think that they do. I think they know exactly what they're doing, which is why I agree on one hand that we shouldn't get distracted and that we shouldn't actually re-amplify this kind of rhetoric by sharing it and discussing it in such a way. But I also agree with what Karen says in terms of it is dangerous. This is actually killing us in multiple ways, not just through police brutality in the streets, through arrests and not just on the borders, but also through this pandemic that we're still, let's not forget, we are still in the pandemic. It's still happening. People are still dying across the world from this, and our people from our communities disproportionately.
Yeah. Yes, willful ignorance. Or Nana, go ahead.
Yes, just a second or third what Belle said. I was going to say, I don't buy it. I think they're intentionally saying that because they know exactly what it means to say all lives matter.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't buy it. I mean, in Ireland, whenever people, like Karen said, they asked her, is there racism in Germany? I don't buy that question. You know that there's racism.
Yeah.
You are in white spaces. You know what is said about us. You know what you say, what your grandparents say. I don't buy the ignorance that white people have. No, you know exactly what it is, but you don't know how much we know. And you want to find out how much we know. Now we know a lot, but yes, I don't buy it. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna draw this discussion to a close because we've run over a little bit. But thank you very much, participants, for giving your time and all of your perspectives from your different countries. And I really feel like it would be useful, building on from that the second to last question on how do we vision a little bit more. I think it would be good if we could share some of the work that you're doing. I know that if anybody's watching, hopefully people are still watching, if you want to know more about what we're doing, then please don't hesitate to contact ENAR. Our personal contacts are there, so you can email us and we can forward anything on to the participants. But yeah, sharing some of the work that we're already doing, I think is really good. And just as a last point, just to mention that and share what ENAR is doing. So we are doing this series of discussions, which we hope people will be interested in, can take some inspiration from, but we're also working on this issue in ENAR in various different ways. So me personally, I'll talk about me because I'm also working on a research project which is looking at police brutality and community resistance. And it sounds like I just started it like 2 weeks ago, but no, this project had been in the pipeline for almost a year now. So it's just by chance that this project is really kicking off now, but I'm finding it super useful to talk to people and find out what's going on, and it will be used hopefully in some way, at least to inform my thinking for this research project. But if anybody wants to tell us more about what they're doing, please don't hesitate to contact us and we can continue this discussion. And we hope to have another discussion maybe next week if we can organize something. They actually do take a long time to organize. But yes, so the short answer is thank you very much, everyone, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us and for hosting.
You.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.